Hi everyone, as the crowd filters in, we're just going to give people another minute to join the GoToWebinar platform. We're really excited to have you join us today, and sit tight and we'll be in touch in 30 seconds. And I think our attendees have got nicely seated. So Jessica, please feel free to take us away.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jessica Baumgartner-Zuzik, and I'm the Senior Director for Learning and Evaluation at the Alliance for Peacebuilding. And today, in collaboration with DM&E for Peace and Search for Common Ground, we're hosting the third of our final three-part series on Ask an Expert in interreligious peacebuilding. So just for the
Jessica, you are self-muted once again. The GoToWebinar demons are out to get you.
Are you able to hear me now?
You're coming through loud and clear.
So lovely, because mine shows that I'm muted. Did you hear any part of that, dare I ask?
We heard Alliance for Peacebuilding, DM&E for Peace, Search for Common Ground, and then you dropped.
Great. So sorry about that, everyone. You would think we would be better at this a year in, but obviously still enjoying the struggles. For those of you who aren't familiar with Alliance for Peacebuilding, we are a nonpartisan network of 130 plus organizations working in 181 countries to end violent conflict and sustain peace. And we work through three lines of efforts to develop stronger partnerships and collaborations, to work on learning and evaluation, which I oversee, and then our policy and advocacy efforts. Today's event is being, as we said, brought to you through the Effective Interreligious Action and Peacebuilding Program, EIAP2, which is funded by the GHR program. And we really wanted to take a deeper dive with some of our field's renowned experts to talk about different components of the DM&E cycle. So thank you all so much for joining today. Very excited to have Jennifer and Kat with us, and looking forward to today's conversation.
Great. Well, with that, let's get started. So thank you, Jessica, for the sort of warm introduction despite the GoToWebinar problems. As you mentioned, this is the third and final webinar in our Ask an Expert series as part of the Effective Interreligious Action in Peacebuilding program. For those of you who are unfamiliar, my name is Jack Farrell. I'm the Manager for Partnerships and Strategic Innovation at Search for Common Ground. I'm based in London, and I'm going to be facilitating today's discussion. So today we're talking about creative communications and how to effectively communicate the results of your work. Who are our experts today? Well, I'm delighted to welcome Kat Haugh, Senior Advisor on Organizational Learning at the Global Knowledge Initiative, and Jenny Nulty of Pivot Data Design. So firstly, Kat has spent the last decade working at the intersection of design, evaluation, and social change. She is an illustrator and an evaluator who uses design experiences to help teams and individuals tap into their creativity and be more visual in their thinking, communication, and collaboration. Jenny brings creative energy to making data intriguing and impactful while helping clients transform the way they communicate their story. Jenny's work focuses on bringing research-based transformations to a range of deliverables, including charts, slides, reports, infographics, and dashboards. So over the next hour, we're going to be discussing topics such as how to integrate visual thinking into data collection and analysis, how to integrate that thinking into your reporting, and we're also going to look at new ways to effectively communicate results, how to make dense and difficult topics more accessible, especially when working cross-culturally. And we'll also be looking at how to move beyond the traditional 70-page report complex. A couple of notes about don't know where from, but a couple of notes about our format. So I don't sound like a robot. A couple of notes about our format for those of you who are not familiar with GoToWebinar, or this is your first Ask an Expert webinar. This discussion is being recorded and will be posted on the DM&E for Peace and Alliance for Peacebuilding websites. So those who are not able to join us at this time can go back and listen to the presentation and the discussion. Secondly, this is a conversation with all of you all around the world who are joining us today. And you can submit your inputs in two ways. The first is through the question function on your GoToWebinar dashboard. That will allow you to type your question, and then I can vocalize that to Jenny and Kat. The second is to click on the hand icon. Now that hand icon will allow us to unmute your microphone so that you can ask your question live. For each question, we ask that you kindly introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, and what organization you're from. And as I mentioned in the last couple of webinars, it's like a really awkward meeting at a bar or disco. So you can submit your questions right away for today's experts. Please feel free to get cracking on that. Kat and Jenny, how are you doing today?
Thanks so much for that epic introduction, Jack. I feel like I'm like, wow, we've never sounded better. I feel like, Jenny.
I know. I was like, wow, we're pretty spiffy over here.
Oh, this is a fancy professional production. This is a well, Jenny and Kat, I'm so excited to be talking with you for the next hour, and I know our audience are really interested. This is nearly double the size of last week's audience for these Ask an Expert webinars. So I'm sure they're going to have a ton of great questions. But just to get us started and set the scene for today's discussion, could you both tell us a bit more about your background and how you ended up working in that sort of nexus between design and evaluation, that sort of data and visualization aspects?
You go first, Kat.
Okay. I'm looking at you like, are you going to go first? Well, I think I'll start. It's kind of both my own individual story and maybe also our shared story, Jenny and I, and how we kind of came into partnership. But both of us have evaluation backgrounds. Jenny went to a master's program in evaluation and has some hardcore research skills. I have some experience working with a social impact evaluation firm called Innovation Network. And my personal journey is I came into evaluation being really curious about understanding how groups of people can improve what they're doing and how they know if they're having the impact on the world or a particular issue that they want to be having. And I got really excited to know that that type of profession existed in the world. It wasn't something that I knew when I was younger and thinking about like my professional aspirations, that was a job you could have. And I think through my work and kind of dipping my toe into the evaluation field, I became more and more interested in helping people to actually learn from and use the evaluation findings that me and my team as external evaluators were geeking out about and getting so excited about what we were learning and thinking about creative ways to really engage people in the data and in the information that we were gathering. And so for me, my own kind of entry point into visual design, I mean, I've always been an avid doodler and somebody who really appreciates a good notebook doodle. But my entry point really in the professional world of visual design is really through illustration and drawing a lot of comics and graphics and things like that. And so I personally found that that was really helpful to help me in my own learning practice in terms of digesting information and making sense of it and kind of being able to engage with it in a more human way and also to communicate about what I was learning in my evaluation practice with others and to spark a conversation or a new way of thinking or talking about the information that we were surfacing. And that's kind of brought me to where I am now with an interest really in organizational learning and systematizing learning practices and ways to embed a learning culture and a different way of thinking and working together that doesn't treat evaluation as standalone, externally driven moments of learning, but more as like an entire process and culture and way of working. And something that I love working about with working, one of the reasons why I love working with Jenny is because we both kind of bring this mosaic approach to our work where we have research and evaluation backgrounds. We're really interested in learning and experience design, and then of course in data visualization and bringing visual thinking into the mix. So that's a little bit about my long-winded journey to get me to where I am today. And I'll turn it over to you, Jenny, to share about your individual journey and kind of maybe start to begin to tell the story of how we merged forces. Awesome.
We met, yes.
We met.
Yeah, I would have never guessed in a million years I would ever do data visualization. I mean, back in the day, after I graduated from undergrad, I actually worked in homelessness in New Haven, Connecticut for a number of years, on the ground, housing people, and I just came to know over time, wow, there's some really systemic issues going on here that are real barriers to people getting access to the resources that they need, which kind of clued me into how data and evaluation could be leveraged to really start to understand the impact of our programs, and how maybe changes could be made to actually benefit the people that we're trying to serve. So I ended up going to get my master's in social work at the University of Michigan, and was doing all about evaluation, doing all the research. And I remember I went to AEA one year and people were like, there was like some buzz about data visualization. And I remember one of my friends was like, let's go to one of the sessions. And I remember being like, that sounds really boring. Like, I don't even know what data visualization means. And so anyways, all that to say, even if you're sitting here and you're like, I don't know exactly what they're talking about, don't worry, you could get roped in just like I did. But I started to really get jazzed about how, as evaluators and researchers, and even just program people, we oftentimes get used to the types of data and we get kind of nerdy about it, and we think that we're doing a good job of communicating it. And then it goes out the door to the people that are really trying to integrate and learn from the products that we're developing. And it's often in formats that are really just not digestible, whether it's a long report or even sometimes more visual formats that we think are more digestible, like one-pagers and dashboards, but they're not formatted in ways that really work and engage people in a learning process. And so anyways, I just totally got jazzed up about data viz and started doing it all the time, even if people didn't ask for it. I was just like, too bad, here's some data viz cool. And then over time, that's kind of all of my work. And I started my company, Pivot Data Design, and I had the privilege of working with a lot of different clients in different fields. And Kat and I actually met kind of at the beginning of maybe a couple years in, 7 years ago. I think we were like counting the years the other day, which seems crazy. And we met at, I came to do a visit at the firm that she was working at for a while. And then we just kind of like, we're like, hey, that girl's cool. Hey, that's cool. And then we just kind of kept bumping into each other, like at AEA and other events. And we just were like, hey, we kind of get along. This is fun. Let's like kick around ideas. And then like over time, we were like, wow, we really have a lot of shared values about how we work. And our foundation is coming from similar places, but we really have varying levels of expertise that we were like, we could really leverage this to be a powerful kind of package to bring to different projects. And so we've gotten an opportunity to work on different projects together, which is just exciting. So that's a little bit about my background, and then I kind of told you a little bit about how we met too.
I'm not surprised at all that you guys connected at AEA, given this sort of small audience or small community of data visualization experts. The same people pop up every single year. Chris Lizzie is like sort of one of the sort of founding fathers of that in this field, or thinking about communicating differently with regards to evaluation. So yeah, I think that I'm not surprised, and I'm really excited for some of the insights you're going to be able to share with us today. So something you mentioned there, Jenny, was like your work in New Haven taught you sort of, or demonstrated that some people weren't getting the information that they needed, oftentimes due to the way it was communicated. So one of the questions that's already come through is coming from Jindra Sekan. Jindra is based in Prague in the Czech Republic. And Jindra asks, like, how are communications different when creating, for example, infographics with policymakers versus trying to communicate with implementers or local partners or local communities? How do you communicate most effectively with different audiences around the same ideas and concepts?
That's a really good example. And I actually have this little matrix about knowing your audience and planning a visual. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. I know this is the first time, just to show you and walk you through kind of how I think about like two diverging concepts and how that comes into play here. So give me 2 seconds while I click some buttons over here. What screen can you see? Can you see yourselves?
We can see your notes. We won't be able to see the GoToWebinar dashboard, and we can now see the Know Your Audience.
Yep.
Matrix.
Okay, that sounds great. So this is just a quick little diagram that I like to always use when I'm thinking about planning out my deliverable for a particular audience, because the reality is I like to think in a simple way, just to kind of wrap my head around it, that there's almost like going along, let's imagine like an x-axis of sorts. There's like data literacy, like how literate is the audience that I'm talking about? How often do they see data? Not necessarily how educated they are. That's not necessarily this. It's like, you know, if I put a dot plot in front of them, are they going to know what, like, are they going to be at all familiar with it? So data literacy matters, and then also your audience's availability also matters. So they might be very high data literacy, but they might have really low availability. Like, for example, maybe students or people in your field and stuff like that, for example. So I like to think about those two leveraging things, and then be intentional about planning a deliverable, not only the type of deliverable, whether it's like a one-pager or an infographic, like you'd mentioned, Ginger, or whether it's even beyond just the deliverable type, like the messaging and the words that I use to kind of flow through the overall data story. And I try to use and base who my audience is kind of from the ground up, like the design, the look and the feel. And the best way to do this, if you have an ability to, is to actually include a couple audience members in the development of your product. Whoever the product is for, try to engage them in some way. So I've done some like almost product testing where I'll do almost like an interview where I'll share a deliverable and kind of talk through with an audience member, like, how is this working? That's one way you can do it. But yeah, so anyways, I would encourage you, if you can, to have key members of your target audience a part of the deliverable development. And it's hard because, like I say, your key audience, and some of you might be thinking, oh God, I have so many people that I need to communicate to, and I don't have that much time or money or whatever to put into all these products. So anyways, I know it's a little bit of a complicated conversation, but that's a little bit about my response. Kat, is there anything more you would want to add?
Yeah, I would add to the concept of like co-designing with your users and thinking about like an end user's experience, no matter who they are, where they're coming from, and what they're interested in, and seeking to engage them early on in the process, because like any kind of visual product that you create, your ultimate goal is for it to be used to facilitate some sort of shift in thinking or information sharing, to get really clear for yourself, like who are you targeting and for what purposes, and thinking about light touch ways that you can engage them early on in the process. And some things that I've had success with in doing that is either doing empathy interviews with your end users, even just a small subsample to understand what their pain points are and kind of what their experience is, even in the day-to-day, where they might be accessing a dashboard or looking at a chart. And another tool is using small pilots. So instead of waiting till the end to show them like the full dashboard, show them a sketch first and have them weigh in on the sketch, or show them like the beginning of the tool or the product that you're working on with them, to get their feedback throughout, to make that kind of a continuous process of co-design. I think the last thing, something that I've become really interested in recently, is around decision-making science, and in understanding specifically when your end users are going to be using that visual, whether it's a dashboard, it's an automated tool, or if it's a set of charts, or it's a report, a visual report. Thinking about how to structure that information and the timing of that information so that it informs key decisions that they'll need to make. And so as part of your initial inquiry and learning about your end user and about kind of challenges and pain points and opportunities that they face, also understanding what decisions they would be making with this visual, like what conversations would this visual be informing, maybe it's for an annual retreat, and thinking about then, okay, if it is intended to spark a generative conversation, how then can that inform the design of the actual visual product? And what types of decisions, are intended to be made using the information that's being displayed visually. So I would say something that Jenny and I really talk about a lot is zooming out of the data visualization. I think a lot of our conversations with our partners start with the idea of, I need a dashboard, or I need an infographic, or I need an animation, and we'll kind of zoom out with our partners and ask some questions of kind of like, okay, like let's unravel this a bit. For what purpose? Like for whom? Have you talked to them? What do they think? How would they use this? When would they use this? and then gathering all of that information about the end user and then incorporating it into the design, and then maybe revisiting, maybe it's not actually a dashboard, maybe it is a visual report or an infographic that updates quarterly or something like that. So that's what I would add to that in terms of the helpful matrix that Jenny shared, is really using an array of options to get to know your end user a bit more, and specifically how they'll engage with the visual product and how they'll use it to inform decisions or conversations that they might have.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great point, Kat. I think it takes time to socialize learning. I think people often think, we publish an evaluation, the key points are in the abstract or the executive summary. People should be able to take that away and sort of internalize it and utilize that to develop more effective programs, when actually, every single person interprets information differently. So I think that point of, knowing your audience, sort of having these empathy interviews, sort of understanding sort of where their sort of key pain points or barriers might be to that utilization piece, is a huge element of effective communications. And I think this leads on to a next question of mine, is that both of you have worked with a range of organizations on this element of communicating difficult concepts. What are the biggest challenges that you've seen when working with peacebuilding organizations or development organizations or NGOs generally when it comes to communicating results? What do you find that organizations struggle with the most?
That's a good question. I think I have one that comes to mind at the top of mind. I don't want to say this is the most, because I've seen varying things come about, but I think, and Kat, you'll, I'm sure, say more about this, but I think so I've done a lot of work, obviously, building lots of visual products. And a lot of times the visual product is seen and framed as the end of the conversation. Like, this is the end. Like, here we go. This is a synthesis of what we did. And really the way that I see visual products is that it's the start of a conversation, and really trying to shift people's mindset around those visual deliverables, whether it's a dashboard, a report, an infographic, whatever, and using that to leverage more conversation to dig deeper under the surface, and actually operationalizing a learning strategy that is paired along with a visual deliverable to get at those deeper conversations. I feel like for me, I would say that is one of the biggest things that I see is lacking, is just the framing around visual products as the end of the conversation rather than the start of one. Kat, I don't know if you would agree or, yeah.
No surprise. I totally agree. I think that, like as Jenny said, I've seen oftentimes that partners that I've worked with will, as you said, Jack, like when a report is created, then it's like, okay, here's the report. Now everyone go and learn from it. And just the reality of the way that we learn as complex humans, and also the way that we learn when we're in complex teams with multiple dynamics going on, is that people just don't really learn or like digest information effectively in that way of just reading a report. So I think something that I've seen organizations struggle with a lot is not resourcing the facilitation that needs to kind of accompany a visual product to start the conversation and to be able to surface collective learning, because everybody's going to engage with the visual differently based on their lived experience and the biases that they're bringing into the conversation. And I think the real learning comes through the facilitated event and through the conversation around the visual, and not just the digestion of the visual, especially when that's done independently. I think like some very powerful things can happen when groups sense make together, and the visuals are one ways of aiding and embedding that conversation. I think the two other things I would say is I've sometimes seen partners struggle with breaking their own, sometimes like a fixation on a specific visual product, of not being open-minded to consider maybe there's a better visual product to help them achieve their goals even more effectively, of just being like, no, we absolutely need a dashboard. And some of the resistance that can come when asking questions about who is this for and for what purpose. And then last but not least, I think many folks on the line will resonate with this one, is in just measuring intangible results when, especially in the field of peace building, I think it's probably one of the most difficult fields, because it's capturing human relations and communal relations. And just, yeah, I've seen that be a struggle of how do you effectively share with funders or in the communities that you're working in the impacts that you're having in your work, when a lot of them can be intangible. And that's when I would say something that I get really excited about is using kind of like the arts writ large and other ways of communicating and sharing knowledge and experiencing information that can speak to some of those intangible elements that may slip through the cracks in an otherwise like quantitative series of charts or just a narrative report of thinking about a range of visual and other types of modalities to share about your work through storytelling and art and other means. And that's something that I love working with Jenny on, is bringing together kind of our different areas of expertise and interest in terms of artistic display and visual design, and thinking about how are we really going to convey like what the main message is here and capture these stories and capture this data in a meaningful way.
The one thing I'll add to that, which you alluded to, is sometimes it can be intimidating when we do have multiple audiences to communicate to, and they have differing needs and different questions. Like the questions that they need answered are different. And so one of the ways that I try to respond to creating deliverables, or a set and range of deliverables that can actually engage multiple different types of audiences, is to think about your visual engagement with people along a learning strategy that scaffolds multiple and layers different deliverables. So like maybe you start with something that's a little bit of a lighter touch, like maybe it's even just like visualize social media posts that like grab people's attention. And then if they're like jazzed up, then they can find maybe a poster or like a more in-depth infographic. And then if they're still jazzed, like it's almost giving people options and multiple different visual deliverables to engage them. Because if you just throw, even if it's a beautiful report, even a 20-page report, is a lot of information to digest at somebody. And so like starting with something like a visualized infographic or a visualized executive summary to pull them in. And then you kind of get their buy-in a little bit visually by engaging them. And then they're going to be more apt to dig a little bit deeper. And if you can pair those different varying scaffolded deliverables along with a more in-depth like learning strategy to actually facilitate some conversation, to integrate those deliverables into conversation, it can really increase just overall learning and usability of the products.
I think that multiple modality piece is key. You know, for me, I see a 70-page evaluation and it makes me want to cry.
Did you say 7 page or 70?
How many years have you shed, Jack?
You know, I've read some 7 pages that have made me cry, but 70 pages is normally where I'm like, okay, I'm not going to read this. I'm sure.
I thought you said 7, and I was like, okay. As an evaluator, I'm like, oh, come on, you got to give us a couple more pages there.
Well, it's that thing. It's that people just learn in different ways, and people they sort of absorb the information in different ways. And as a non-evaluator who's worked, has been embedded in an evaluation team for the last 5 years. Sometimes I get really frustrated whenever, you know, the automatic decision around how do we communicate more effectively about the results in an evaluation is, oh, let's do a 2-page summary. It's like, wait, hold on, like who are we talking to? Who are the audience we should be communicating with? Are there better ways we can get this out there? Could we record like a 60-second clip? Could we do a webinar? Like there's so many different options. And I think that's so important. And I think that ties in with my next question, which comes from Silva Ferretti. And Silva talks about his experience in, you know, using visuals and cartoons in a number of different consultancy projects. But what happens when you encounter a donor or a contractor who's like, I just want an evaluation, I just want a long report? And how do you communicate about sort of, you know, the importance of communicating in a number of different ways? How do you communicate with a donor or a contractor to help them see the point?
Mm-hmm.
I'll say my little quick tidbit is, because I run into this all of the time, because the reality is we are not trained in school to build visuals in this way, to visualize data and to write reports in this way. And so for a lot of people who have a background in training in this, it feels uncomfortable to be like, okay, let's do this in an infographic or a webinar, and like even in visual cartoons. it can even just not putting a standard chart title on a chart and saying the main point of the chart in the title can be like totally outside of the box for some people. And so one of the ways that I will get buy-in is you have to kind of think about it a little bit in baby steps, right? You might not go from like a 70-page report to like a cartoon and an infographic in a webinar. You know what I mean? You might not jump from one to the other. So it's about like a little bit of a process and bringing people along. But there's actually a lot of literature, research in the field around how people's brains interpret information. And there's a lot of brain science around that. Actually, the traditional way that we present data just doesn't work. Like, people can't understand information from that. And I'll often start with that conversation, because if you give people like, you know, actual science and you know, findings that support what you're saying, it makes it feel a little bit more comfortable to be open to newer ideas. So that would be one idea I have. I don't know, Kat, what your approach might be too.
Yeah, this one is a doozy, because I think for me in particular, because my illustrations are a bit out there, I feel like, in terms of being like a decidedly different approach to visualizing information, that I have to be honest, I don't usually encounter this type of experience or resistance, because most folks that contact me directly for an illustration or an animation are already on board and are already like, oh, this is great, and this is going to help us, and our users are going to love this. So I would say, like, I've seen Jenny's presentation on the brain science behind data visualization, and it's impeccable. So look to her website or email her about the studies that she's compiled on that, because it's really compelling. And I think, to her point, there's a lot of small things that you can do. It doesn't have to be a huge, you know, webinar or animation or a completely different visual approach, but just some small, subtle ways that you can use color and some kind of like foundational design skills in how you're putting together, even if it's a 70-page report, how you can use color to block out different sections and kind of help somebody who's digesting the report access it a little bit more easily to find within that 70-page report what's relevant to them. I would say to start small, and then to kind of use that process to help build the trust with their partner that you're working with. So then to build in and embed a way that you can learn about how effective you were in that approach. So then you can compare, like, you know, how about for this one, we will use some visual design elements, or we'll create an accompanying, you know, infographic. And then we can track online, you know, how many people are downloading this compared to previous reports that we've done, so that you have a little bit more data in your back pocket, in addition to the brain science, to say, look, it is actually working and people are actually engaging with it more, to help kind of sway your partner, or to open some minds. And then I would say, otherwise, I would just ask a lot of like broad questions about the value of the evaluation and what the purpose is, and kind of take a step back beyond the actual product. And yeah, just inquire about mental models that might be shaping that connection, or the idea around the report specifically. But those are always tough conversations. So was it Sybil who asked the question? Or am I remembering your name? So if you do have experience, please let Jenny and I know, and probably Jack. I think this is something that everybody on the webinar, and definitely we, are interested in, how to have these types of conversations effectively. And otherwise, good luck, and let us know if we can be resources.
Good luck. Yeah. I think one of the important things, though, is, like, you know, I know we discussed this in last week's webinar for anybody who attended, is the importance of evidence-based decision making. If you have the data to justify why you're making the decision, if there is research that, you know, can help make the argument for you, always, you know, rely to that. I often find when I'm communicating with donors or different organizations about why we should do a certain activity, being able to have a reference point that is clear and makes the case always helps. So that's my only sort of add on to that. Jenny, in your diagram that you had on knowing your audience,
yeah,
access that showed availability and data literacy, could you elaborate on what you meant by availability? We just have a question from the audience on what availability means here.
That's a really good question. I'm happy to expand a little bit. So the way I think about availability is, your audience's ability to like dig deep into what you're presenting. So for example, even if you're bored, if you're on a nonprofit, you're bored, they might have a little bit lower availability, right? Because they meet once a month and they have a packed agenda, and they're gonna like look at your, whatever your report is, and sending them even like a 10-page report might be too much information all at once. So they might have a little bit lower availability than other people like that are more invested in understanding the information you're giving. So like the public, for example, I would say is a great example of like the least availability, right? They're not gonna, they might even not even look at an infographic, right? If you're thinking about sharing things in the public sphere. And so leveraging things for more of like a social media kind of smaller snippets to engage people is important. So that's what I mean by availability, which is like how available are they as an audience member to really engage in your product. And just being really honest and real about that. There might be people that like you would think would be more available than they actually are. So I think it's about really digging a little bit deep and asking the right questions to understand who your audience is maybe.
So one question we've gotten from about 10 different people are, do you guys have any resources that we can go to help us, you know, put these ideas into action? And I know we talked about when we did the run through about sort of sharing links. So just to our audience, we will be sharing a package of links with everybody with, you know, Jenny and Kat's information, so you can sort of see what they use, see what their best advice is, and sort of point you in the right direction. So those links are coming. If they're not in the chat at the end of this webinar, they will be in an email to all the attendees in the next 24 hours.
Yeah, and I'll make sure like throw some other in there too for you, Jack, to throw out like other resources online, like open free ones that people can access. I'll make sure I share a couple more too. So
there is nothing better than a good free resource. So our next question comes from Samin Zara, and this is a really, really good question. And Samin's question is, what is your advice for those working with organizations that find it difficult to narrow down their audience? Some organizations want to target various types of groups at once because they view it as having a greater impact, but that of course makes it difficult to produce a specific or targeted visual product.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Target audience. This is complicated. This is honestly one of the trickiest things. So I think this is a really good question. I don't want to act like I have the right answer because I don't think there really is a right answer. I will say just one thing that I've been thinking a little bit about is the different power dynamics at play when it comes to how we choose who our key target audiences are that we're communicating to. And I think oftentimes people with power get prioritized, meaning the funders, the people who give us money, right? Like we might actually want to engage a larger set, like the people that we're actually serving or the communities that we're working in, or even staff in our area might be actually really important to engage them with the information. If you think about getting feedback and starting those deeper conversations, maybe that might be the meat of where things are. But I think a lot of times you can get stuck into feeling compelled to actually have to only respond to a funder or other different types, even board of directors. Like there's almost these responsibilities and they often get prioritized, and the types of information and the way that you present it is a little bit different between those two audiences. So my answer is that I would actually think about this. Not only is the question like, who do you need to report to? Because like, it's often going to be the people with power. So thinking a little bit deeper beyond like really analyzing the power structures at play, and then maybe engaging some of those people that you traditionally always create the reports for, like your funders and your board of directors, and starting to educate them about how you actually want to change the type of deliverables to be really for a different type of audience, and actually engaging them in that conversation can be useful. So anyways, I don't know if that's helpful. Kat, do you have more to add to that question? That's a good one.
Yeah, this is a great question. I don't know that I have the answer either, but my best guess would be two thoughts that I have is really to go back to your theory of change and your strategy, and to think, you know, I have some experience with using like champions models for theories of change, and then getting really specific, like we are engaging like this subset, a critical mass of champions, and we're looking at kind of like this group of champions, people in this instance that I'm thinking of, people within the USAID universe who are mid-level in their career and who have high levels of influence, and thinking about those individuals as being really strategic for us to channel kind of our marketing and communications efforts towards. Because interestingly, something that I've learned over the years is that the most like reputable source of information for other people is like their colleagues and trusted peers. So if you can target one person within a group and they share with their other colleagues and peers, that can kind of start a domino effect in terms of spreading your message and having other people kind of spread your message or spread the visual information that you have for you. And it kind of gets into like influencer and all of these things that we see like on like modern day social media, and just kind of like the science and like behavioral characteristics behind that. It's like how we share information when we trust the source it's coming from. And so I would say to take another look at your theory of change or your strategy for your program, and to really use a behavior change lens on that, and to focus in on kind of like those key groups who would have generative, impacts across the system that you're trying to influence. And then I think secondly, something that I've seen work really well in my work with my current organization, the Global Knowledge Initiative, is using a systems mapping approach. I was just actually starting to think about what's the system that my NGO or my foundation is operating in, and where are there frozen parts of the system where maybe other actors have already got those issues or spaces covered, and where's kind of our sphere of influence, and to use kind of a systems mapping approach and thinking broader than just your organization, but where does your organization fit into this larger ecosystem of actors, and then using that to pinpoint like, okay, we're really going for this group of people because we believe that with the amount of resources and expertise we have, if we leverage that in these specific ways, we can really influence change in the system by focusing on this one lever, instead of kind of like having a generalized approach where you're sending out things to everyone. I think it's really helpful to use a systems mapping approach and taking a behavior change lens to your theory of change and starting there. I feel like this is a great example of what Jenny and I, the types of conversations we have with our partners a lot, where it starts with, a visual product, and then we're like, but what's your strategy and how does your team learn and what type of change are you ultimately like hoping to see? So thanks for giving us the opportunity to show you kind of a little bit what our many conversations are like.
But I think you made a couple of great points just around that answer, Kat, and then the second point you made around the systems mapping approach. Like the great thing about a systems map to me is that identifying the opportunity. And identifying a clear opportunity and a clear sort of opening in a field or in a piece of research that you can explore to make it your own. One of the things I often grapple with as someone who runs multiple knowledge platforms across the entire peacebuilding field is that we work in a field of finite resources, and we often duplicate each other's work, and it drives me nuts. And it's like, how can we become more effective as a field, increase coordination, increase connection, and increase shared learning? So I think, whenever I'm developing a new product or a new concept or trying to, build a new platform, I'm often looking at, sort of where we see opportunities on the map to think, okay, this is an obvious need that we're seeing. Let's see what's out there, and that's how do we add a value add that is significant and different and unique. The other influencers. So I'm one of my other projects right now is the Connexus platform, which is a global coordination and collaboration and networking platform for NGOs responding to pandemics in conflict-affected contexts. So that's inspired by COVID-19, and one of the networks that we're building is called Influencers for Change. So in 2 weeks' time, we'll be launching this global network of influencers who have been using their platform to promote sort of positive social messages. And the reason we decided to work with influencers is that, as you mentioned, like the message is not always the most important thing. But if I hear it from the right person, it's going to make such a big difference. So understanding that the messenger is often more important than the message is a huge part of the current media ecosystem, and also a huge part of how we internalize information.
100%. Very well said.
That sounds like a cool project.
Yeah.
It is one of the greatest platforms ever created, and I think everybody should go check it out. I'll put the link in the chat.
You heard it. resource now. Now everybody's gonna.
Exactly. What I'm calling it is it's Reddit for NGOs, and we just launched that platform 2 weeks ago, and the Influencers Network will be up next week. We're really excited about it, so keen to hear everybody's feedback. So yeah,
one quick thing, Jack, to add to a previous question about resources. So I want to flag this for folks who are wondering about what Jenny and I offer or ways to get connected with us, which I know we'll loop back to at the end of the call, but just wanted to drop in that if folks are interested, they have an idea of a dashboard or a chart or an animation that they're curious about, to please reach out to us. I'm hoping that our enthusiasm and passion for this topic is coming through on this webinar. We'd love to do a discovery call with you to learn more about your project and kind of your vision and to engage you in that process or to point you in the direction of different resources. So please reach out to us. We'll put our contact information towards the end of the webinar. And then I'll also say something we haven't touched on, but I did want to mention is something that Jenny and I get really pumped up about is training and capacity development around data viz and visual thinking. And something that we always somehow find a way to weave into the projects that we do together, especially thinking about sustainability and usability of the visual products that we create. We always want to create the opportunity for some training and work alongside so that the partners that we work with can build their internal capacity to not only own, but then update the visual products that we create, like a dashboard, for example. So if you're interested in training on data visualization or visual thinking or graphic facilitation, that's something that we're really psyched about and have done a lot of work to translate into the virtual space this year, and have had some very cool experiences with that. So just want to, in case anybody's feeling like, oh, I really want to see what could be next with these two people, that that we also would really like to engage with you in these various ways. So thanks for letting me Jack. I just wanted to make sure I got that in there.
Yeah, so like we'll put your contact information, your email addresses in the chat, but if anybody on the line, I know most of you have contacted me before, so please feel free to get in touch and I can connect you. So we have a raised hand in the audience from Susan Fisher Murray. And Susan, I'm going to unmute your microphone so you can ask Jenny and Kat your question live. Let me know you're self-muted, Susan. So if you want to click on your microphone, we should be able to unmute you. There's a little microphone button, Susan, and you should be able to unmute yourself. Oh, Susan, I can see your live.
Hi, Suzanne. Hi. Thanks very much. Yeah, I'm finding it really, really interesting as a session. And I've used infographics before, working kind of to communicate research. What I've always struggled with, though, is just having the resourcing to do it. So because I mostly do kind of the editorial on the projects and then project manage working with, external design agencies around the infographics. And so it's just having, the resourcing to do that. And I'm now working back in the NGO sector. And obviously, it's just resourcing is quite tight. The other thing I would say is just completely reflect your thinking around strategic thinking and the struggle around that, and how you often start a project and that leads to more strategic thinking and questions. So and also your thoughts around kind of communications being seen as the end of the process rather than the beginning. So completely, resonates. All those comments resonate with me. Thanks.
So good to hear from you. That was nice. Yeah, those are all really good comments. I think I totally hear you with the resourcing, because the reality is making traditionally in the way that we present information. First of all, we're not always taught this in school. Like, some schools are kind of starting to teach this stuff, but most often not. So we often enter this into a space where we don't maybe have all of the skills to make it, to actually click all the buttons and make things. And it's not traditionally built into the budgets of our projects, because that's just not, it's not the traditional way of presenting information. So a couple of comments that I have about that is, one of my biggest suggestions for making resources available for these types of products is to start testing it out and building it into your proposals early on, if you have an ability to do that, and writing it in as an actual deliverable early into the initial proposal and budget. And actually, I found that a lot of people get jazzed up about that, because there's a lot of talk about, you know, like infographics and dashboards and other ways to present, engage people in different formats. So oftentimes it'll actually help proposals if that's the way that you get funding or whatever happens. So that would be one suggestion, is to just build it in right from the beginning, to like start setting expectations, and you can start getting stakeholder buy-in from the start. And then the other point that I'll make is that personally, one of the things that I specialize in is doing most all of my design work inside of Microsoft. And so I know you might be thinking, what? But it's true. I can share examples, and I can share some even in follow-up to this call, but I know that there are lots of great design tools out there, like Adobe has some great ones, and, you know, Tableau. There's more complicated tools, but most everyone, I'm sure, on this call has PowerPoint and Word and Excel on your computer. And there are some different skill building resources out there where you can start to learn how to just leverage some of the design concepts into the software that you already have on your computer. So I want to just say that to encourage you all that you don't need special, like, I didn't go to school for graphic design, even though I've done a lot of education in my careers in this, but I just want to say that to encourage you that, like, you do have the resources on your computer, and, you know, it's about learning some of the design skills and then just jumping in and practicing. So anyways, that was my little tidbit about that, because I totally hear you on the resources part. It can be difficult to build that in afterwards. Yeah, I don't know, Kat, do you want to say anything more? So I also loved your comments about the visuals and how we leverage the overall learning strategy, Kat. So I didn't know if we maybe wanted to talk a little bit about, we kind of bucket the types of services that we offer, and ideally most projects have a little tidbit of each of these, but there's like the design work, the actual like doing, the graphic facilitation, the dashboard development. There's the learning strategy about integrating that into larger learning for the team, and then there's training, like actually making sure people can use it and on an ongoing basis. But Kat, maybe you want to say a little bit more about that learning strategy piece.
Yeah, definitely. And just, Suzanne, to share one more thought I had of what Jenny was talking about with resources. I think something that I've seen Jenny do amazingly with the partners that we work with is help them to use tools that are accessible to all of us, like working in PowerPoint or Excel and doing that for a specific reason. And then working with teams to build a template for an infographic, and then kind of walking them through the foundations of good design and helping them to use that template, that whether it's in PowerPoint or it's a combination between PowerPoint and Excel, so that your team then would have the skills. Maybe it's like 2 or 3 people on the team, maybe it's like communications focused folks on your team, then have the skills and the ability to use that template and change it over time, or kind of like plug and play with different data or information and then share that out. So I would say that's something that I've seen in terms of thinking about resources, is really focusing on training and creating solutions that have a longer time frame and shelf life than what can be really expensive is hiring external consultants or graphic designers who are amazingly talented and can put together like beautiful infographics on a really short period of time. But then usually those come to you in an Adobe format or PDF and aren't workable. So thinking about solutions or trainings where you can get a template and a product, and then also the know-how of how to keep that alive and change it as you go. On the topic of learning systems and learning strategies, this is something that I am really passionate about, is really thinking that the end purpose for a visual of any kind is to spark generative conversation and collective learning. And so something that, I'll pass it back to you, Jack, if there's questions about this, but something I love and would love to talk to folks on the line more about, both of us, is thinking about how to design virtual facilitation engagements around visual products, and thinking about kind of a longer arc of an organizational learning strategy of how are groups, pausing and reflecting together on information, how are they making sense of that, How are they using that to inform tactical decisions that they might make in their programming, like on the ground, switches that they might make in the day-to-day, and also strategic decisions, you know, taking a theory of change view or a systems map view, and just the nature of that type of collective learning is fascinating to me. So if anybody would like to talk with us more about that, we'd love to talk about that with you all over another virtual coffee, but I am conscious of time, so I'll pass it back over to you, Jack.
Yeah, so that's like I think that's a really sort of topic du jour as well, given what we experienced in 2020. Like digital facilitation became more important than ever, and being able to sort of manage and facilitate these strategic processes where you would normally be sitting in a room with, you know, pages upon pages of sticky notes, you're now having to do online, and you know, there's an element of fatigue that comes with how we probably did it last year, and then there's probably so many different and creative ways we could, you know, jazz it up to keep people engaged. I am very wary of time, so I want to make room for 2 more questions. Stephanie Fisher has asked a long question, and I want her to share it with the audience because I feel like I can't do it justice. So Stephanie, you are unmuted if you want to go ahead.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thanks for a really interesting conversation so far. Yes, my role is evidence learning and impact manager for an international NGO based in the UK. And one element of my role is trying to get our bid developers to utilize learning from live or historic projects and to put them into our new proposals. So I'm not really talking about sort of the communication and utilization of learning from one specific evaluation, but trying to get them to sort of almost filter through all of the different evaluations that we've got in our sort of bank, work out which ones are relevant to their proposal, and apply the learnings that are relevant from those ones. My approach so far has been a giant filterable spreadsheet with sort of every row is a new evaluation and sort of tagged with countries and sectors, and so they can filter it, and then a sort of a cell with the key points of the learnings. But it is so visually unappealing, and it is so hard to get people to want to engage with it. And I just thought sort of whether you'd come across anything like this, if you had any ideas for either to make the sort of database better used or just more visually attractive.
That's a really, that's a great example. I feel like Kat and I are actually working on a project now where that resonates a lot. There's some parallels. And I'll share a little bit about how we've approached this project, and then Kat, I want you to jump in this. But I think there are definitely ways. I mean, first of all, I just want to celebrate you because that sounds like a lot of work to put that spreadsheet together, like across all those evaluations and getting it all entered. So I just want to say that is like the bulk of it. So I celebrate you because that's a lot of work. And I think it's also really important work because I think similar to what you were saying, Jack, earlier around building off of what others are doing in the field, like we've been doing this for years, so learning even from previous evaluations and work that we've done and leveraging those learnings like in the real time is, I think, really important. So I think this is a really good concept, and if there's a way to engage your audience in this database to actually in a more active way. So there are some things visually in Excel that you can do to make it feel less spreadsheety and Excel-y and a little bit more like button clicking. So I'll be happy to share like a resource around like a slicer. I don't know if you've heard of that before. And anyways, I'll share a couple of resources with Jack that he can pass along. But one of the things that Kat and I did with the project we're working on with a similar kind of parallel here is we re-visualize the actual database itself to be a little bit more visual using some slicers and making it feel like less like an Excel spreadsheet. And then we also integrated using that database into a larger learning strategy. So like with the team, like we did some trainings, some meet and greets. It's about getting people's buy-in on the process to actually use it. And Excel can be intimidating for people. So we did like little coffee meet and greets to actually meet people and show them and be like, this is what we're thinking. Like, does this work for you? Do these filters make sense? Like, are there any questions, so that people feel like they're a part of the design process? and then at the end actually doing some training on how to use it, and then actually facilitating conversations, saying, okay, we're all going to actually go use it, and then facilitating some virtual discussions around integrating it into like a larger strategy. And Kat, I don't know if you want to say more about that, but
I know we're just at time, so I will just say, Stephanie, this is like the exact type of thing that Jenny and I love to work on. So please reach out to us, because I do have some thoughts and resources that might be helpful in your specific context. But I am conscious of time, want to respect everybody's time. So I'll hand it over to you, Jack.
I was going to ask, do you have time for one more question? And this is going to be really output oriented to round up the conversation. So this question is inspired by my colleague Anaïs Capou, and this comes down to the fact that, like, what are some activities that we can sort of do with our colleagues to help them start thinking in a creative way? Like, how can we get them to start thinking outside the box? And Anaïs's question is, you know, you guys come from an M&E background, but also a visualization background. So when you're working with monitoring and evaluation staff who, you know, don't have a background in visualization, like, how do you like sort of have conversations that are, you know, creative and sort of get people thinking in sort of different ways, because in Anaïs's experience, she's found these conversations quite hard, as they don't really know what they want, and there aren't graphic designers who know the state of the field.
Yeah, I have two quick thoughts, and then I'm curious, Jenny, your thoughts. I would say first to show people the universe of what's possible, because I think that can be really inspiring to say, like, look, what's possible with this type of information is a dashboard, or what's possible with this type of information is an animation. And people are like, oh, wow, that's cool. I didn't know that these options existed in the visual universe. But then oftentimes in that experience might feel like, well, I have no idea how to do that, or where do we start, or we would have to hire an expert to do that. And then I think the second piece to kind of help address that emotional experience or feeling like there's a barrier is pulling the curtain back and helping people to tap into their already existing well of creativity. Because I think that there's a lot of self-limiting beliefs out there. People, I've had this myself, of thinking like, I'm not a creative person, you know, I don't know how to do this, I couldn't possibly do this. And something that Jenny and I love to do across data visualization and across drawing and illustration is teaching people simple and accessible tips and tricks, small things that you can do in Excel or PowerPoint, or small things that you can do with just pen and paper to help people kind of tap into their own ability to think creatively. And I've seen, I'm curious, Jenny, if you feel this too, but I've seen that is really where there's like an avalanche moment for people where they're like, oh, wow, I'm shifting the way that I'm thinking about myself and my own creativity. Like, I could create something, or we could create something, and to see kind of that excitement be stoked by that pulling back of the curtain is such a cool experience. So that's what I would say. What would you say, Jenny, to that question?
I would say very similar to what you said. I think every time I start a design project, I start Googling. I'm just like looking for cool things that inspire me. And so I would maybe recommend starting that conversation by, in your field, in your context, maybe just doing a little bit of looking and searching to see cool creative tools that other people put out there. And maybe you're not going to replicate it or do the same thing, but at least it starts to inspire some creative thinking. But also recognizing exactly what you said, Kat. Once you get people excited about visual things, we start to undermine our own selves, because we're like, oh, wow, that's so cool. And then you're like, but I have no idea how to do that. Like, don't put me on the queue. Like, I'm not doing next steps after this conversation. Like, we definitely need somebody else to do that. And so I think recognizing that oftentimes those creative conversations can kind of bring up some self-doubt in people. And so I think, one, just diving in broadly and being like, what are creative solutions that could actually work? And then I think doing a little bit of development, like around just some tactical skills around, even in the software that we work on, and just changing colors and being intentional with how we apply colors. And you can start this in small little ways. So anyways, I hope that helps answer your question, but I think it is a challenge. With maybe
no, I think you both made such great points there. I think showing the array of options that are available to people is so important. I often think about this whenever we're talking about applying technology to peace building programs. Unless you have a tangible example of how, you know, WhatsApp could be used in sort of looking after expecting mothers in a certain scenario or different case, you're not going to be able to think about it in that way. and being able to see sort of tangential examples is just really helpful for, you know, helping you think about sort of what you could potentially do. I know whenever we're building a new platform around DB for Peace or the Connexus platform, I'm constantly looking for other pieces of inspiration, to other fields, to other pieces of other websites, to see what ideas I can steal or potentially repurpose for our platform. And I find that outside, that external sort of inspiration is really important. And on that idea of what's possible, my team are on this call right now, and I often say this to them, is that if I have an idea and I go forward with it, I wait until I have someone tell me it's impossible. So, you know, I work with web developers, and I wait for them to say, Jack, you're crazy. But they don't say, like, 90% of the time, they're like, okay, well, I think we could probably do this, or okay, we can find a solution here. It's like you can push the boundaries as long as you're willing to, and as long as you're willing to get embarrassed once in a while, which happens to me quite a lot. Okay, well, Kat and Jenny, thank you so much for staying on 5 minutes late. This was an incredible discussion. We got so much interest, so many questions. I'm wondering, should we just do a session like this more often, because people have a ton of different sort of questions they want to ask. With that, I just want to, thank you guys. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for coming to today's sort of discussion with such an open mind, in interpreting all the questions as best as possible, and offering really tangible advice for people to take forward and apply to their daily work. I really appreciate it, and I think it's been a great way to round out our series. I also want to give a special shout out to Jessica and Saurav at Alliance for Peacebuilding. They were instrumental in developing this series. I'm really happy with how the last 3 weeks have gone, and it has been a pleasure to facilitate these conversations. And thank you to our audience for joining today's webinar. This webinar was recorded and will be posted online on the DB for Peace Media Gallery later today. So please return to it and feel free to share it with your colleagues and continue the discussion in the comments. Jenny and Kat, I don't know if you have any last parting thoughts you'd like to share with the audience.
Just thanks so much for having us. I'm kind of bummed that the conversation is over because I'm having such a good time. But yeah, I'll just say, please, like, it was such a phenomenal conversation. Hope it was helpful, and please reach out to us because we'd love to have the conversation, continue the conversation, and connecting with you all offline. But thanks so much, Jack. This was so enjoyable, and our first kind of podcast experience, so that was fun.
Look, I always dreamed of being a podcast host, not a webinar host, so that's what this is.
That's so great. Thank you. It was so good to hear questions and really dive into this conversation. Everyone was bringing out really important points. And as Kat mentioned, we're here. Like, if you have any questions, like, I'm always happy to share resources and ideas and have conversations with people afterwards. So thank you.
Great. Well, Jenny and Kat, thank you once again. We really appreciate it. And I'll be in touch later today with the recording. And to our audience, it's been my pleasure to chat with you all over the last month. And I look forward to doing it again soon. We do this once a week on DB for Peace through our Thursday talk. So please continue to join us. And with that, I'll bid you adieu. Take care, stay healthy, and please look out for one another. It's tough out there. Okay, talk soon and take care.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye.